On a foggy London night, a light still burns in a window on Baker Street. Inside sit two men. One, a detective whose eyes seem to miss nothing about the world. The other, a loyal friend who never leaves his side and narrates his adventures. A knock comes at the door, and with every new visitor arrives some strange, seemingly impossible puzzle waiting to be solved. This pair became the most famous crime solver and the most devoted chronicler of the late 19th century. In this book, 11 separate cases come together, some of which still surprise readers today, ranging from a vanished racehorse to a stolen government treaty to an ordinary-looking job offer that turns steadily darker. The book is called The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. Let me tell you the story. Arthur Conan Doyle was born in 1859 in Edinburgh, Scotland. He grew up in a family of Irish Catholic background. His father was an artist whose health was never strong, and it largely fell to his mother to hold the household together. Doyle was educated in Scotland and England, and eventually studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh. One of the teachers he encountered there, Dr. Joseph Bell, was famous for diagnosing patients almost at a glance, drawing enormous conclusions from tiny details, reading a stain on someone's clothes or a callus on a hand as though it were a written biography. Doyle would later say, many times over, that this teacher was the true inspiration for the detective he eventually created. Doyle first opened his own practice as an eye doctor, but patients rarely came, and in those idle hours, he began to write. The first Sherlock Holmes novel, A Study in Scarlet, appeared in 1887, but the real explosion came when Holmes' short stories began running one after another in the Strand magazine. Readers started lining up for each new monthly issue, and the magazine's circulation soared almost overnight. Doyle himself grew tired of the character over time, wanting instead to write historical novels and what he considered more serious literary work. But the fame and income Holmes brought him were so enormous that he could never fully break away. Years later, he was knighted for his medical service and writing during the war in South Africa, though the public always remembered him first as Holmes's creator. The book in front of you, published in 1893, is Holmes's second short story collection, and it contains what many consider the single most pivotal story in the entire series.
The stories in this collection show Holmes's method at its purest. Before Watson has even reached the scene, Holmes has already deduced, from the dust on the brim of a hat, the wear on a coat sleeve, or the callus on a hand, what someone does for a living, where they have been, even what they are thinking. One case in this collection involves a racehorse that vanishes under mysterious circumstances, and a trainer found dead, with the answer emerging from deep within the world of horse racing, from a place no one expects. In another story, an ordinary stockbroker's clerk receives a strange, almost too generous job offer that turns out to be part of a far darker scheme. In yet another case, an old file from Holmes's own past, from his university years, resurfaces, and we learn how the detective solved his very first case. This collection also finds Holmes investigating a missing jewel, a family secret buried in shadow, and the theft of a secret naval treaty. One story finds a strange secret creeping into what appears to be a happy marriage, and for once catches even Holmes off guard, proving that even he cannot always guess correctly at first. Another case reaches back to an old event that took place years earlier in India, casting a dark shadow all the way into a quiet English household. In one story, a character never mentioned before steps onto the stage, Holmes's own brother, Mycroft, a mysterious man said to play a role behind the scenes of government, known as much for his laziness as for an intellect that may exceed even Holmes's own. Watson himself often reminds us in this collection that Holmes's method is never magic, only close attention to details that sit in plain sight, yet that no one else actually bothers to look at. Whether it is a quiet clue in a country house or something buried in the crowds of a London street, Holmes applies the same patient observation everywhere. But the collection's most talked about story arrives at the very end. In that final story, a figure Holmes has pursued throughout his career finally appears directly on the page. a man as brilliant as Holmes himself, but who has turned all of that brilliance toward organizing crime, Professor Moriarty. According to Watson, this man sits at the center of nearly every major crime in London, like a spider at the middle of its web, living publicly as a respectable, seemingly impeccable mathematics professor, while secretly directing an entire criminal network by night. Holmes senses, for once, that his own life is genuinely in danger and flees across Europe together with Watson. The two men are drawn all the way to the Swiss Alps, to a narrow path beside a thundering waterfall, where one of the series' tensest and most debated scenes plays out. I will not tell you how that scene resolves here, because the true pleasure of this book is reaching that final page yourself. What keeps these stories alive today is not simply how cleverly the puzzles are built. Holmes turns reasoning itself into something close to an art form, drawing an entire story out of one small detail, and in doing so, teaches the reader to observe and question the world a little more closely. Watson's warm, admiring, yet never overblown narration lets readers approach Holmes's genius without feeling alienated by it, because we, like Watson, stay one step behind and share in the same astonishment. Moriarty's first appearance in this very book also gave the detective genre something lasting. The idea of a villain worthy of the hero's own brilliance, an idea that would go on to shape nearly all suspense fiction for the next 130 years. Holmes's observational method also spread well beyond fiction. Later experts working in forensic science openly credited these stories as an influence on how they gathered evidence and reasoned through it. Many of the stories in this collection also carry, quietly beneath the mystery itself, the deepening friendship between Holmes and Watson, a trust between the two men that is rarely spoken aloud, yet felt on nearly every page. There are some notable details behind this book's publication, too. When Doyle decided to set Holmes aside in this collection's final story, he did so deliberately, believing the character was overshadowing his own literary career. When the story was published, a genuine wave of mourning swept through England. Readers wrote furious letters, and some London gentlemen are said to have worn black armbands in protest. The backlash was so overwhelming that Doyle was eventually forced to bring his detective back to life in a later story. The image most people now picture when they think of Holmes, the checkered deerstalker cap and the caped coat, is barely described in Doyle's actual text at all. It was largely invented by Sidney Paget, the illustrator who drew the stories for the Strand magazine, and his drawings became so tightly fused with the character that they now define how the world pictures him. Some of the stories in this collection also became the subject of controversy in later editions over certain details they originally contained, which makes the publishing history of the Holmes stories a fascinating story in its own right. The Strand magazine itself became one of the best-selling publications of its era, thanks largely to Holmes, and its circulation climbed noticeably in the very months these stories appeared. We have covered the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, but the real power of this book lies in the challenge of trying to solve each mystery yourself before Holmes does. You can find the other books in this series on the channel as well. If you would like to hear the complete book as an audiobook, you will find the link in the description. Subscribe for more videos. Until the next one, may that light in the Baker Street window always stay lit.